Oregon picked up a big win against Stanford. A lot of things looked good, but not everything. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I am your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. I so greatly appreciate all of you out there who have done so already. Today's episode of Locked On Ducks is sponsored by Simply Safe Home Security with Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe. 24/7 monitoring agents capture evidence to accurately verify a threat for faster police response. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. I did a Stanford preview here last week on the show with Rian Winter. He was at the game, wanted to bring him back, talk about what happened down there at Autzen on late Saturday night. And I mean late Saturday night. Pac-12 after dark. I call it Pac-12 after bed because most of the country is asleep by the time that happens. But Ryan, you were not asleep down there at a rockin' Autzen Stadium and a 31-3 halftime score. Have to imagine that felt pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's just something special about beating Stanford. Didn't grow up with a lot of animosity toward them, but in my adult life, they've been a thorn over and over and over. So it was really good to get that win. And God, the stadium was rocking. It was a very late night though. I got back to Portland at 3:30. I mean,
Oof. That's
I've
an
never
oof.
really been in. Yeah, I mean, left Autzen at least 12:30. I've really never left the stadium after midnight before. On the bus back to Valley River, a bunch of people. There was a lot of people there. A lot of people stayed later than normal. I don't know why the blowout was in full effect. It looked like it from the jump. It was just not the Stanford team of old. Players are there. There's talent there. I talked to a lot of parents who were really frustrated with the situation, Stanford parents. Man, it was just a weird deal with them. I didn't understand their play calling. I didn't understand the body language. It felt like they were just running out here, knowing exactly what was going to happen. We're just going to play our plays, get out of here in a couple hours, get on the bus, and get back to the airport. There was no sense of urgency. That I sit right behind the visitors' bench, so it's really easy for me. And most of the time, it's the offensive line who are on that side. And so when those guys come back, like I can read body language a little bit, and there's like it was nothing there. And I felt like it was a really tough situation right out of the gate. I mean, within the first, play, the first series was like 30 seconds, they punt. I mean, it was like there was nothing really there. And I didn't understand also the new style of that extended delayed mesh or whatever you want to call it, that slow read, because, unless you're pulling it and throwing it over to the tight end, which worked a couple times, it doesn't really do that much for your quarterback or your running back. It allows your quarterback to get sacked, and it just allows the defense to kind of react a little bit. And up against a good defense or a fast defense, I don't think that's going to make that much of a difference. So I don't know. I think this David Shaw thing is kind of trending in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And their roster from a composite ranking doesn't lack for talent. But this is what I wonder about with Stanford, Ryan. As football at the collegiate and professional levels has migrated towards a pass-centric, offensive-heavy approach, that's where all the innovation comes from. It's where most of the coaching hires in the NFL and at the college ranks, not all, certainly Oregon just hired Dan Lanning and such. There are exceptions, Washington State, Jake Dicker, but most new hires look like Kalen DeBoer at Washington, Lincoln Riley at USC. You come in and you score a lot of points. It seems like that's a faster way to win quicker. And so David Shaw, I feel like, has an identity crisis on his hands where the way that he played football as a head coach when Stanford was really good was a certain way. And we all know what that was: ball control, physical defense, line up under center, that sort of stuff. And they had players in the trenches on both sides. Now, as it's become more about your skill position players, like Oregon has, and we've seen a lot of them over the last several years, but this team's got a bunch, and USC's got a bunch of skill position players. And the Trojans didn't revamp their offensive and defensive lines. but they're winning games at a high level and they're scoring a bunch of points because they brought in a quarterback, some receivers, and a running back. And I wonder if David Shaw, over the last few years as Stanford has recruited, their rankings haven't fallen off, but I wonder if he's just not recruiting the sort of players that he used to in the trenches, because Oregon can run the ball on anybody, right? We saw him run the ball on Georgia. We saw him run it against BYU. This offensive line is really good. The running backs are really talented. But to me, what's happened with Stanford is they're just not bringing in the sorts of bodies on the offensive and defensive lines that they used to. And that team is soft. And Oregon, to their credit, exploited it in a big, big way. But when was the last time you heard the phrase Stanford allowed over 300 rushing yards to Oregon? Chip didn't even do that, man.
Well, Stanford gave Chips fits for whatever reason, and I just think that time where Stanford was winning 10 games a year, you're right, they were winning in the trenches. They had different bodies up front. They had NFL caliber guys up front, and they had NFL caliber guys at the speed positions as well. So it just feels like right now, I don't know if Stanford is not really embracing the transfer portal. I know that they weren't that active there, and it's a tough school to get
Well,
to
they
in
can't be.
anyway. Right, it's a tough school to get to anyway. It's just a situation where they might be up against it a little bit, and as times have changed in college football, they might be lacking a little bit. I do know that their recruiting ranking going into this next year is very good for Pac-12, but it's a tough sell there, and it might be a situation where they need to look forward a little bit and maybe look outside the box, because they're very inside the box at Stanford because it works for them. And I do also think that Oregon's playing really well. I think that Oregon's offensive line is playing just absolutely lights out.
Right?
And I
Yeah,
do
they're
think that
they're
the
so good.
defensive line is playing very well. We talked about this before going into this thing, that the defensive transfers on the defensive line have completely transformed that defense. And both guys had a really good day. Jordan Riley and Casey Rogers both had a really good day. And so did Taki as well. But I think those two guys from Nebraska have really separated themselves as guys who just get a lot of quality snaps. One, they're on the field a lot. And two, they're doing a lot of work when they're up there. They're either standing guys up and they're getting double teams, and they're allowing the linebackers to eat, which have been doing very well. People have said, "Where's Noah Sewell?" He comes and plays great couple games. I think they've been there, but I think that a situation for this Duck defense, that there was really nothing to stop for this Stanford team. They could not run the ball very well. They had a couple plays here and there, but you knew they were going to go to their bread and butter, which is their tight end. And that was kind of keyed on them. They didn't really have that much going on with their deep ball or the wide receivers. And, it seems funny to me that you'd be down your starting tailback, you'd be down a couple offensive linemen, and you'd even want to run with the slowed down mesh point even more. I would think you'd want to get the heck ball out of the quarterback's hand and throw the thing around and at least start getting some first downs. But it never seemed like it kicked into gear. And then they scored late. They have some garbage time points. I mean, their second half, they did okay, but I think at that point in time, the game was a wrap. It felt like it was a blowout in the second quarter, and Oregon was only up a couple scores. So it's like one of these games where it's just like body language, energy on the side was really, really not good for this one. It felt like Stanford kind of knew what they were going to get into. Let's get up to Eugene. Let's get the hell out of there, and let's get back to Stanford.
Yeah, and I'm not a fan of the long mesh. I think that it goes back to what I was talking about, that because Shaw recognized coming into this season that, okay, I can't play offense the way we used to because we don't have the bodies to do that anymore. So I've got to come up with a new way to move the football. And I give him credit for trying, but I think you got to go back to what they were before, because, man, it just doesn't work. It gives the defensive line too much time to get to the quarterback. McKee's been under constant pressure the last couple weeks.
Absolutely.
I think it's an interesting concept, but then when I watch it, I go, okay, this is not working week in and week out, other than some big runs that ultimately led to turnovers anyway against USC, a defense that can't stop the run against literally anybody right now. So I think that's just trending in the wrong direction. But Oregon, to their credit, took advantage of it, right? They looked for the most part the way that we wanted them to, that we expected them to. It was a 31-3 game at the half. The final score was a lot closer than this game really ever was. It could have been more. Oregon could have put up, I feel like 50 or 60 in this game really, really
Oh,
easily
easily.
had they wanted to. But there was one thing that stood out that's a big negative that we really got to talk about. And I'll tell you about that after reminding this episode brought to you by Simply Safe. The numbers don't lie. In the last decade, over 4 million people have chosen Simply Safe Home Security to protect their home. You don't earn the trust of that many people without doing something right or a lot of things right. At Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. With 24/7 professional monitoring, Simply Safe's agents call you the moment a threat is detected and dispatch police or first responders in an emergency, even if you're not home or can't be reached. Simply Safe blankets your home in protection with advanced sensors for every room, windows and doors, HD security cameras. They've got it all. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege. Save 20% on your Simply Safe security system when you sign up for an interactive monitoring plan and get your first month free. Visit simplysafe.com/lockedoncollege to learn more. There's no safe like Simply Safe. So, Ryan, you were down there at Autzen Stadium, and the biggest glaring negative for Oregon in this game, the execution in the red zone, I actually thought was better than Washington State. I thought the play calling was more simplified. I thought Dillingham improved in that sense, and
I
that's what I
agree.
want to see from a first-year head coach in Dan Lanning, first-time full-time play caller in Kenny Dillingham. I expect there to be growing pains, and what I'm glad about so far is that as we're seeing those growing pains in some areas, Oregon is still winning football games. That's a great place to be as a program writ large. The reason, though, the Ducks did not have the sort of success they could have in the first quarter of this game, the penalties slowed Oregon down in the red zone. And this question came in. Someone wanted to know when the last time Oregon had that many penalties. They had 135 penalty yards in this game, Ryan, and still pulling the first team offense they scored 45 points, which is a pretty remarkable feat when you think about it, because that's a lot of penalty yards. The last time they had that many yards or in that range, it was also a blowout victory. 2019 at USC, the Coliseum. You and I were both there. Oregon had 12 penalties for 157 yards, which is an unconscionable number. But the fact that Oregon won both of those games is a testament to how talented these teams have been and how successful of a program Oregon has been the last several years, because most teams in the Pac 12 put up 135 or 157 penalty yards. They're going 0-2 in those games, or maybe they squeak out a tight win. They're not 2-0 with an average margin of victory of over 25 points. What did you make? You were there at Autzen Stadium on Saturday night. What did you make of all the penalties we saw from the Ducks?
Well, it was a lot, and of course, there's a lot of Duck fans who do not like Stanford, and it seems like any of the Stanford games, you get more of them, and there's all sorts of this booing and everything else. I mean, it was loud in the stadium. The refs, every single time the yellow marker would come out there, the refs would get on it. It was not good, but watching it in the stadium, as the Duck glasses, green and yellow, we're looking through, we kind of it's hard for us to see anything really go against the Ducks, right? So we're like, oh, horrible. And then you go and when they do show replay, they used to show more of the replays. Now they've kind of cut back a little bit because they don't want the secondary crowd reaction of, oh, but they put it on the board. And a lot of times, it is a penalty, especially when you go back and watch the film. So I get home 3:30 in the morning. I'm still jacked up. I try to put up the highlights, watch the film. And, the first one that's a killer is the downfield penalty for the offensive lineman. That one has stuck the Ducks a couple times. It's legitimate, especially that one, the first play. Chris Hudson has that nice little tutty, and it's taken off the board because you got two guys actually downfield on the tape. But
They're about
it's
5 yards. They were about 5 yards down the field. It wasn't you. You
it
get
was
three.
it
Just
was
for
a
everyone who doesn't know, you get
it was
three.
egregious, and they were
Yeah.
locked in their blocks, and they were just driving. It was like, early in the game or whatever. I don't know. Blame it on whatever you want to blame it on, but it was not good. And so in the stadium, of course, that's a horrible goal. Oh, how dare you take away a touchdown? Oh, God. And that just kind of started this thing. And then it was just a variety of other things. But there were some weird ones, right? Did not agree with the horse collar play in the corner. Steve Stevens looked like he had the shoulder, the jersey just underneath the shoulder as he's pulling the jersey down. Thought that was a weird call. that really didn't affect anything, but it was a personal foul call going in for that touchdown against San Francisco, on the kickoff or whatever. But there was just other plays where it's just, it kind of felt there was a little element. And again, I related that to basketball when you play playground ball, the guy goes up for the shot and one. And a lot of time, and one is when he misses. And of course, we have to kind of say, no. And one is when you make it. No, just call the foul. But a lot of those dudes go up and they're like, foul. And as soon as they see that ball go off the rim, it felt like there were some plays like that where there were some late flags. Ducks run off a 10-yard run. Hey, holding. Let's bring that back 10. Let's stretch this game out another 15 minutes. And again, going to the goddamn monitor. The guy sits right in front of me in the monitor. I'm right in 34, so I'm close. They bring over the thing. There's such a huge production now just to look into a screen. A guy has to come out. Another guy has to come out, an assistant, set the thing up. They open up the little Clydesdale's face mask thing. He gets in there, and there's a guy who brings him his glasses, which I love. Nothing better than a ref needing glasses. How about a guy that's his job to bring a pair of glasses to the guy, and then he keeps the glasses in the monitor and gives it back to the guy. Then he makes the whole production about him, whether it's still a play or not. And half the time it is. The whole crowd already knows it, but they have to go through this, and it takes so long in the stadium. It's just like ridiculous. The refs have really done a crappy job over the last, I would say, 5-10 years or so. It's been slipping. And the whole Larry Scott debacle with the guys up in the booth and all that sort of jazz that they had running there didn't help anything. So the refs, as soon as it happens, boy, the crowd gets on them. And, there were some bad penalties, yes, and they have to clean that up, yes, but it also felt like there was some BS going on. I mean, we had 14 penalties, they had 5. I mean, it was like, what are we doing here? Like, are we even playing the same game? And you're right. It took us out of it took the Ducks out of a touchdown a couple different times. They had to kick field goals a couple different times, or whatever the case may be. But a frustrating game on that end. But you're right. There was some resiliency. They got through it. And more importantly, they beat Stanford. Another random trivia thing I saw was first time playing Stanford for a first-year head coach at Oregon. They hadn't got a win since like the 40s. Like, no one beat Stanford in their first game as the first coach. Like, Chip didn't do it.
Yeah, that's a
Brooks
good
didn't.
point. I was at Stanford in 2009, and Toby Gerhart ran wild. We couldn't. I still think he's running. We couldn't tackle the guy. He ran through our entire defense.
That guy was a load.
Helfrich then in 2013, the 2013 regular season, Mariota's knee wasn't 100% there. They made a ferocious comeback, needed the onside kick. I think it was like 26-0, right? I mean, it was just a disastrous game, but Marcus being hurt was a big part of that. And then after Helfrich, you had Willie Taggart in 2000 and let's see, what was that? 17. Was that a Burmeister game? I think that was a Braxton Burmeister game. And we all know that those were all losses. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great trivia nugget.
Yeah, and I saw some other thing
Cristobal
about
2018, by the way.
Yes, that was the fumble. They should have run the clock out, and
they should have nailed the clock out.
Yeah, and I actually the thing, if you can find it, I think I saw it on Twitter, but it was like a list of like all the coaches like since the 1800s or some sort of thing, because we've been playing Stanford a long time. The other thing I saw was a meme where Dan Lanning was like, they put the face on him where he's like scrunched up face on like a Grim Reaper costume, and he's going like door to door, like murdering things or whatever. And the things he was murdering were like these curses, and then the next one was like win a road game at Arizona. And that was like the next door.
That is.
So there's our segue.
Yeah, that is indeed the next door, and I do want to talk about this Stanford game and how it may translate, or what we want to see translate over to the Arizona game, because we're down in the desert this week, and I think the desert should be the D word here on the show, because there have been too many nightmares down there in Tucson and in Tempe. But if you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys, like the opposite of Oregon football playing down in the desert. Guess what? There's a new flavor, ready, delicious, indulgent cookie dough, covered in 100% real chocolate, built has done it again. 160 calories, a whopping 15 grams of protein. You can go get yours now. Snag a box for you and the family. It'll be the perfect treat this Halloween season. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKEDON15, get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your next order of Built Bars. Go get your cookie dough chunk puffs today. So, Ryan, the penalties were the glaring negative, but that was kind of the only negative,
Yeah.
right? And it's something that has to be cleaned up. It's something to address going forward. You don't want that to be a recurring Achilles heel for this team because they can stall out drives, they can extend drives for the other team. Like if they come at the wrong moment in a game, they can be incredibly pivotal moments. They can be as pivotal as a turnover because they can impact whether or not your offense stays on the field or whether or not your defense has to stay on the field for another few plays. And maybe that leads to a score. So that's something Oregon has to clean up, even though I agree a couple of the calls, like Marcus Harper was called for a hold, and I watched the play, he pulled around and hit a linebacker, and I was like, nope, that's not a hold. That just I didn't see the hold there. But most of the other ones, from what I saw, were legit, and that's got to the
Yeah.
pre-snap penalties. Once you get in the red zone, that's the stuff you got to clean up. But
Yeah.
let's go to the good stuff because there was so much good stuff in this game against the Cardinal. Is it a somewhat depleted Stanford team? That they're a shell of their
Yes.
former selves for
Yes.
sure, but they're still a conference opponent, and David Shaw still knows how to coach football. And it looked like Stanford's defense just got outmatched physically and athletically by
Yes.
Oregon. But Kenny Dillingham, I thought, made improvements in the red zone. And again, between the 20s, man, that guy is off to a really good start. He and Bo, you see why he wanted to bring that guy in because they're working together seamlessly. Not Bo's most accurate game as a passer, but he brings in the running factor, has a big game, and his decision making, Ryan, has just been excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can just tell how explosive he is as an athlete, getting out of what could be sacks and running for first downs or running for touchdowns for 80 yards. I mean, his running ability sets up the other runs, sets up the pass. You know, it's a great system that they have going on right now for him. They trust him. He trusts the receivers. Troy Franklin's playing awesome. I
Oh
mean,
man,
that
he's good.
sideline catch was ridiculous. I
Oh, it
mean,
was so
whoa.
good.
I mean, the freeze frame of it too, with both feet in. And again, that's just kind of like just playing ball. Like that was really kind of a play that extended past anything that was of substantial, sort of synchronicity, and it was just like make a play. And he got deep in the end zone. He came back. He made sure he was foot in the bounds. He gave Bo a good target. Bo put it where only he could get it, not where a guy could intercept it. And, Troy made a great play on that. And again, that's another one of those where in the stadium, it happens live and it's a touchdown. And then it's like, wait a minute, let's go see that play again. I want to see, put on the hood, go into the thing.
Well,
Minute.
I understand.
I
I
get it.
understand it for that.
I get it.
It should
But
it
it's
should
like,
be faster. It should be
we
faster.
should
I'm
be
with you
able to
there.
like put it on the big screen for a second and be like, we're good. Okay. Yep. I see that. But all you need is one boom. That was a catch in the pros. So, and I'm not trying to dog on the refs. I'm just saying, like, this is just how it goes. It's just they get this in this rhythm and they get everybody starting to get kind of anxious in the stadium when they make a call, to the point where even though they're making good calls, it's the Ducks' fault for making the penalties in the first place. The crowd kind of turns on them. So I loved Oregon's game plan. I thought they were better across the board, and I thought they did a heck of a job. I think this next week this Arizona team's gonna pose some problems that Stanford didn't really attack. Stanford didn't go upstairs at all. Stanford didn't attack downfield really at all.
They didn't
When they
attack the
did,
perimeter in the passing game. That's where Oregon's been vulnerable. The quick
right,
hitters, the screens,
right,
getting it out on the edge. They haven't done very well except for
yeah,
maybe the BYU game when they were missing their best weapons. But Arizona's got T-Mac, Jacob
oh,
Cowling. We
yeah.
know Jaden Delora is a good quarterback in this league. Arizona, I think, offensively presents much more of a threat than Stanford does, though defensively, I think they're pretty similar.
I would agree with that. And I thought that Stanford just would take advantage of some of those things they saw on tape. And that's what it felt weird to me, that their play calling was just off. It didn't feel like it was for the right game. It was very strange. I think that This Arizona game is always wild. Down there is always crazy. It's kind of like Washington State. It gets crazy down there. You never know what you're going to get. Sometimes good Duck teams show up. Sometimes bad Duck teams show up. This is a team I think is going to really focus. I think the Georgia game is going to do a lot for this team long term. I said this to my son on the way out of that thing. We just absolutely took a beat down. Said this might be a good thing for this team. Again, I'm speaking from a coach's angle where it gives you a lot of fuel for the fire. It lets people kind of reestablish where they're at. It takes a little air out of the balloon a little bit. People off the bandwagon, whatever you want to call it. They're on a run right now. And this Arizona game is at a perfect time. If you can get yourself in a right mindset, win this game on the road, get another quality road win, and you have 2 quality road wins and a home game in the conference, and then you get to take a bye week. It's the perfect scenario. It's like absolutely hit the reset button, take some time off, see the fam, do whatever you want to do in that little time. Hit the brakes a little bit, because this is a team that I think has some real aspirations, and they've got some games that they've definitely circled. I know they're week to week. I know that's the brand for all coaches, but you got to believe they circled this Utah game. You got to believe when you watch Utah on tape, they look like the best team in the conference. Obviously, USC is the highest ranked team in the conference, but that's going to be a showdown when they play each other in a couple weeks. And you just got to like where they're at right now. You got to like where the Ducks are at. You've got this mentality that you've learned something from your team each week. I don't know what you learned from your team against Stanford. I don't know, because it seems to me Stanford's not at all the team. And they might not win another game. They might struggle against ASU. They might have a real tough run of it. And it would look really obviously negative if this is how Oregon does them, and then Oregon struggles and then they struggle, and then you're looking at this as a high point. But that's not how it's going to be. I think the Ducks have a really good game against Arizona. I do think the wide receivers are going to pose a problem for them, but I also think this is a game where that knowing that that's going to be the case, it's going to be the run game that's going to burn Oregon, right? So, yeah, I think you put a lot of pressure on the wide receivers, force them through the middle. That's where Oregon's stronger anyway. So it's just all about who can dictate the game. That's just football 101. And if Oregon's offense can dictate the game, then Oregon wins. And I do think Oregon's defense is good enough to hang with Arizona's offense. And I do think that Arizona's defense really is not going to have too much of an answer for Oregon. I think the way Oregon's playing right now, they've got everything going. They've got a great running game. They've got good passing game, and they've got a really active quarterback. That's a danger zone for any defense. And their offensive line plays awesome. Yeah. So it's like, dude, I mean, pick your poison, right? So you better be a good defense to hang with this Oregon team. And if you look at the whole rest of the schedule, the only real proven good defense left on their entire schedule is Utah. Because even Washington is suspect on defense. If you look what happened to them last week, right? Washington State, obviously, they didn't show up defensively. Oregon scored 40 against them. Washington, you're going to have Cal, which maybe is a good defensive team, but they didn't look that great last week either. So I think the Ducks are in a primo position right now. And if that was the thing we kept saying, remember in the offseason, Spencer, we were like, hey, if this Oregon offense can do what we think it's going to do, we think the defense can do enough to keep them in games. The offense should be able to win some games for you, or win a lot of games for you. So this is the stretch where the offense just needs to show up. You keep scoring 40 points a game, you're going to win.
I think we're seeing a lot of realized potential with the Oregon offense right now. And if they keep playing at this level going forward, they should be able to get to 10 wins this year, which is what I thought they'd be at after the regular season coming into this year. And getting back to the Pac-12 championship game, I think that's a very realistic goal, even for a first-year head coach, because of the talent you have coming back from last year and what you brought in. And I am doubling down on that feeling at this point in the season, right? And things can change. After the month of October, we might look and go, man, remember that time when the offense was flowing and the defense was, stopping the run really well? Those were some fun times. I don't think we're headed there, but is it possible? Yeah, a lot can change over the course of an entire football season. But I thought Washington State's defense, for the most part, played pretty well, and then they just kind of let up a couple scores late. And the fact that Oregon was able to put up those points when they really needed to on the road in a hostile environment against a pretty good team in Washington State, I think is telling of where they are. Against this Stanford team that as we've mentioned, dating back to last week, is just not very good. I think we learned that Oregon can still perform at a high level in conference, high enough to win, high enough to be productive without playing perfectly.
Yeah.
Bo Nix missed a couple of deep shots that he has hit this year. He hit Thornton and he hit Franklin. He hit Hudson up in Pullman against the Cougs. And then he came this week and he had a couple guys. And I was like, man, he overthrew Hudson in the end zone. He had him. And that's a throw that Bo Nix has been making. And I think that's a good thing to see because I don't think that was Oregon's best offensive performance in the first quarter. They can be better than that. They can move the ball. I think they will against Arizona. I think the Wildcats will struggle to run the ball in this Oregon defense because guess what? Everyone is struggling to run against this Oregon defense right now. You got to beat them through the air. And I'm sure they'll have that sort of approach. But that sort of specific game preview talk we will save for a little later in the week. But Ryan, overall, good vibes out of the Oregon football program right now. Glad you were able to get down to Autzen once again as usual, and glad you were able to come back here on the show. Always appreciate you coming on.
Of course, man. Appreciate you, Spence. Thanks so much.
I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.